IVM.
Hello and welcome to episode 101 of the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast. This is DJ, your host for the week. It's slightly surreal saying 101 episodes, of course, but this week I am joined by Ashwin from the city that never sleeps. Ashwin, it's 4 a.m. where you are. Do you want to tell our listeners why you're recording at this slightly absurd hour?
Yeah, pretty unbelievable, right? Obviously, as you mentioned, there could be lots of cities that never sleep, but I'm in New York City at the moment, and just scheduling, man. There was no opportunity to record on Sunday evening when we normally do that both you and I would have been awake and functional. I had the very, very fortunate opportunity to go watch a taping of Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, which is obviously a great show that I'm a big fan of. So had a good chance to do that, but that meant we have to record this at 4 a.m. So if you're listening, thank you for listening, and I hope you appreciate the commitment to being here and recording for you once a week, even if it takes doing it in the middle of the night.
Yeah, well done. And Varun, of course, is jet-setting around with the Indian cricketers. So if you guys follow us on Twitter, he bumped into all the Indian cricketers in the Singapore Airlines lounge in the Singapore airport. So he's got a picture with Ravi Jadeja. He's hung out with Mohammad Shami. So pretty cool stuff. He'll be back next week, of course. Ashwin, there is lots of cricket to talk about actually this week. So let's get straight into it. I don't want to keep you up too long. So the first thing that's happened yesterday, and I'm sure you followed this very closely, was the India versus Australia T20 World Cup final. Now, I know, Ashwin, you're a big fan of the women's game. You follow all the India games as well. So, as you know, Rain put India through against England because they topped the group. They had 4 wins out of 4. And then Australia won a thriller against South Africa. It was a rain-affected match because Sydney had a lot of rain, which is why India went through with the washout. And they won a thriller by 5 runs, leaving India to play Australia in the final. Now, India had beaten Australia in Sydney in the opener of the tournament, so we were pretty confident. But it was quite a different story yesterday, Ashwin. Now, let's start right from the top, as we usually do. Was India's fate sealed by the pitch, the kind of the pitch that was given to us for the final, and then the toss?
Yeah, it's a big question. I don't think so, and I don't think it's easy to say India's or any team's fate can be sealed before a match starts. It's a World Cup. It's a final. It's a knockout match. I mean, anything can happen, and that's what makes this format of cricket, meaning any sort of elimination, knockout, playoff format of cricket or any sport for that matter, so exciting. So I think the writing was on the wall, meaning the math was pretty clear. We talked about it before this show. Snehal Pradhan, who we had on before the World Cup, talked about it too. There is no doubt going into this World Cup that by a large margin, Australia were favorites, right? So there's no doubt about that. And going into the final at the MCG, I feel, you talked a little about the rain-affected semi-finals. There's a whole separate debate that happened about should there have been reserve days or not for the semis. I feel pretty safe and confident saying the top 2 teams from the tournament qualified. Now, again, that's part of the nature of a World Cup playoff style tournament where maybe the top 2 teams shouldn't have qualified because it's all about having a great day on the day of the semis, not just as the 4 group games. But that's a separate debate. I think to answer your specific question, the odds were in Australia's favor, but I wouldn't say India's fate was sealed at the toss.
Yeah, so obviously Australia won the toss and chose to bat this time instead of bowling first, which is what they did in Sydney. And the pitch was an absolute belter to bat on, and obviously Australia backed themselves to get a big score. Ashwin, let's start also with the effect of the crowd. There was this whole campaign about filling the MCG. The stated aim of the organisers was to get that huge kind of massive arena filled up with spectators for the final. And given the 2 teams involved, India, lots of following in Australia and around the world, and of course the host nation, they went out of their way to do that, and they did really, really well. They actually managed to have 86,174 people at the MCG, which is unbelievable. I mean, it's kind of like Boxing Day test attendance, right? Which is a traditional big day for cricket in Melbourne. So Ashwin, maybe India were not as used to playing in front of big crowds. I know Harman and Smriti have said it didn't affect them, but what do you think? Do you think there would have been an effect? Because obviously, remember, we don't play the BBL. So India doesn't, I mean, there are some players that play the BBL, but we don't have a league like the BBL or the Women's Big Bash. Were we a little bit overawed by the occasion and the crowd?
Yeah, I think 100% true. I think, again, probably a little bit of a vague or generic answer, but I think even if we did have a Women's Big Bash, even if we did play it, I think walking into a stadium like the MCG with 86,174 people, I think it's fine to be overawed, to be honest. I think everybody would have been overawed. I think players who've been in World Cups before and played in front of those types of crowds before, yeah, maybe you're slightly better equipped to handle it, but it's still a huge occasion. You're still walking out to bat with butterflies in your stomach and your mind racing, saying, oh my God, I'm batting in a World Cup final in front of 86,174 people. So I think we were 100% overawed, but it doesn't mean it was easy for the Australians to go out because they had played a Big Bash or because they had played at that ground before. Maybe slightly easier, but still a huge day for anybody. Also, I mean, just to caveat this, I think they've officially said this was the biggest attendance for a women's cricketing event anywhere in the world and the biggest attendance for a women's sporting event in Australia ever. So I think those are both pretty amazing stats. Hopefully the start of continued growth like this for the game.
Yeah, there's some great stats and some great stories of young girls and young boys watching this game and saying this was just absolutely incredible. So let's really hope that this helps women's cricket take root and firmly place itself on the map. But Ashwin, you talked about the occasion not overawing them and people having played. Maybe there was a little bit of an inside track with Alyssa Healy, right? Because her husband, Mitchell Starc, was here 5 years earlier. And she went off like an absolute rocket, just lighting up the MCG, just like Starc did in 2015 in the first over, right?
I mean, as an Indian fan, it was really difficult to watch. I guess as a fan of the game, and if you were a neutral, it was an outstanding start. I mean, early on in the first over, I think she had three fours or 4 fours in the first over, and that just set the tone for the entire match, right? It's really something for the openers to show up and make a century partnership in a final. I mean, Healy ended up with 5 sixes, 7 fours, striking at nearly a strike rate of 200, and ended her innings at 75 of just 39 balls. So outstanding. I mean, she was the player of the tournament.
No, she was player of the match. Beth Mooney was player of the tournament.
No. I was going to say player of the tournament the last time around.
Oh, okay.
And then ended up player of the match. And Beth Mooney, who's been player of the match in big tournaments before, not World Cups, but in Big Bash, ended up player of the tournament, right? So for both openers to cross 75 and to get a 115-run partnership, just unbelievable. Like I said, disappointing as an Indian fan, but outstanding for the game.
So let's talk through a couple of things there. Firstly, Starc flying in to watch his wife play. Well, I thought that was just a fantastic look. It was really great. He was just like, when else is she going to get to play a home World Cup? I've got to go and support her. So I thought that was a really, really great thing for him to do. Of course, Shefali Verma's dad also flew over to watch her play the final. She had made promises to him saying she's going to score 100. Of course, that didn't happen, unfortunately. But she also dropped a catch in the first over, which was just, so gutting. And it was Alyssa Healy, right? And then, Ashwin, a lot of us lived through the 2003 World Cup, and I'm sure a lot of listeners of ours have done that as well. Did you get the same feeling, the same sinking feeling about the match running away from you before you've even had a chance to get into it while watching that assault by Healy and Beth Mooney?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you never want to draw too many parallels either between the women's and men's game or between current and past cricket, but 100%. I was watching the match again, like today. It was the middle of the night, right? The match started at 3 a.m. in the East Coast of the United States. So not easy timing, but I was fortunate we got to watch it with 2 of my friends, and we were just sitting there watching them hit boundary after boundary, and your heart starts to sink. You start to, exactly like you said, get that feeling that this is getting past the point of no return. I think when they hit 110 odd overs, that's when you realize, yeah, but this is probably running away from us. Now, the optimist and the Indian fan and all of us said, hey, if Healy and Mooney can do it, we have the strength on paper with Shefali and Smriti and Harman to do it, but you sort of know a little bit better, even though you're not willing to let yourself admit it.
Yeah, but what went on? I mean, our spinners seemed completely ineffective. Of course, we dropped 2 catches, which we'll discuss further later in the show. But our spinners that have kind of ruled the roost here, we play 4 spinners and only 1 quick, just looked like they had no response to Alisa and Beth Mooney using their feet and hitting over the top. And is that where the game was lost, do you think?
Yeah, I think in a big game like this, so much of it is about your approach and your mindset, and just what Australia's batters did, and what Healy in particular did early on, is she got in the spinners' heads, right? She started the match off, like you said, with a big first over, and then didn't let anybody settle down. And again, I think that makes a huge difference, because really every spinner came on looked quite hapless. They were missing their length. I mean, Poonam Yadav's strength has been just consistency with length, and ended up dropping the ball a lot shorter than she has all tournament. And you don't blame them. There's 86,000 people cheering on. The openers have got off to a flyer. So I think what Healy did is just rattle them from the first ball in the first over of the match, and then the spinners just didn't seem to have the response. Now, hopefully, it's a young Indian side. Hopefully, with time, with experience, with just exposure to big games like this, big crowds like this, that'll come. And there'll be enough senior players on the side who will, they have the ability to get into a quick team huddle after 10 overs, regroup, find that motivation again. But unfortunately, on the day, it just didn't happen.
Ashwin, did you feel our spinners were getting really frustrated? Because I believe there was a big send-off to Alisa Healy once she got out by Radha Yadav. And of course, I don't know, I kind of lip-read Poonam Yadav giving a Ben Stokes to Haynes after getting her out. So was that just frustration boiling over? Because when we spoke to Snehal, she was just like, there isn't any of this in the women's game. It's a much nicer place to be, right?
Yeah, I still think the women's game is a good place to be. I'm sure there's good camaraderie on the field. I mean, there's been some back and forth in the press as well. So maybe this is an evolution, and maybe it's a healthy one. You want India and Australia, being 2 big cricketing nations, to have a healthy but fierce rivalry. So I think that, to answer your question, there was 100% a lot of frustration in the side. I mean, even any match situation, you look at big professional sports people, they want to do well, right? So even after Healy had, taken most of the game away from us, the wicket is a wicket, and you want your players to be fired up within what's acceptable and within what's, healthy and doing the right thing. But yeah, they were fired up and they should have been.
Yeah, so let's wrap the Australian innings. They got to 184 for 4. I thought India did quite well to come back into the game. At one stage, it looks like Australia were going to get above 200. I mean, when Alisa Healy was hitting those 3 consecutive sixes, it was not looking good for India. So they did decently to pull back to 184. And remember, about a month ago, India chased 73-74 against Australia with 7 wickets standing. So there was still hope for Indian fans. And like 2003, in the innings break, we all identified the players that we needed to fire. Back then it was Sachin and Ganguly and Sehwag. Here it was Smriti, Shefali and Jemima Rodriguez playing the anchor, and Harmanpreet Kaur coming back in great form on her birthday and scoring the runs for a famous Indian win. As it turns out, of course, we know that did not happen. India lost Shefali within 3 balls of the start, just like we lost Sachin within 5 balls of the start in 2003. And we had a batting collapse. I mean, no one really got in. Jemmy got out for a duck. Smriti tried to hit the ball over the top. And Harman, by the time she got out, it was 30 for 4 and the game was effectively over. Of course, Tanya Bhatia went off owing to concussion. She got hit in the head. And Richa Ghosh replaced her. But at 30 for 4, the game was effectively over at that point, Ashwin.
Yeah, pretty much. I think good summary, and disappointing, obviously, to see it get to something like 30 for 4. Shefali, who's been such a rock-solid presence at the top of the order, for her to get dismissed in the 3rd ball just set the tone, right? Smriti and Harman, you can argue, haven't had great World Cups altogether, and yet the team managed to get 4 victories out of 4. But I think the tone was set when Shefali went for that big shot early on and perished, obviously, caught incidentally by Healy. And yeah, from 30 for 4. I mean, even from, what was it? I think it was 5 odd runs for 2. From that point, recovering is really, really difficult. It was 8 for 2. So from 8 for 2, recovering is difficult, and it gets exponentially harder as you feel you have to get these big shots, because at any point in time, chasing 185 is going to be an uphill battle.
I mean, we don't want to be too harsh on Shefali. She's 16 years old. She's obviously led the way with the Indian side. She's got 160 odd runs during the tournament, the top scorer. But Ashwin, had she been affected by that dropped catch by Alyssa Healy? Because you could see her kicking the floor every time Alyssa Healy hit a boundary. So did the catch that she dropped in the first over of the match, did that catch just affect the rest of the game and just put her off her game for the rest of the match?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. Let's be clear. We don't want to be harsh to Shefali at all. An absolute rock star and huge, huge future star for the game. Had a fantastic World Cup. So many factors go into, her underperformance in the final. And I mean, if you had told me before the tournament she would come and make the number of runs she did, be India's top run scorer, help carry the team in at least 3 of the 4 group games, if not all 4, I would have said that's a huge success from a World Cup standpoint. So absolutely right. No negativity, no harsh words for the 16-year-old. To your question, it definitely showed up in the mindset. And again, that's something that somebody a little bit older, a little bit more experienced, more tenured, may be able to help deal with and find, there are sports psychologists and there are trainers, many of whose role is to, when you go through a negative experience in the game early on, like a drop catch, you find a way to get it out of your mind so that it doesn't affect the entirety of your game. And so Shefali's young, she'll learn with time. She definitely looked like she was bothered by that drop catch, and just the images at the end of the match where you saw her just look completely broken as Australia picked up the final wicket. It's crushing. These are huge, difficult moments for the team, but I have to believe a player like her will get her shot, and we'll hopefully see our country lift a World Cup in her lifetime.
Absolutely, and we wish her all the best. But Ashwin, were the main reasons for the loss actually a lack of performances from an experienced batsman? I mean, coming into this tournament, who would you have identified as the run scorers for India, right? You'd have gone Jemmy, you would have gone Smriti, and you would have gone Harman, right? And despite Shefali Verma getting 40s, no Indian batter got a 50 in this tournament. Alyssa Healy, incidentally, had 3 of the fastest 50s. The top 3 were all hers. And was that the big name players, the players who've played under pressure? Maybe not Jemmy, who's played a little bit of ICC tournament cricket, but not Harman and Smriti not scoring runs and not scoring big runs when needed most. Is that where the issue lay for the Indian team, really, in this tournament as a whole?
Yes, there's no simpler way to answer your question than yes, that's where it is, right? If you think about the highest run scorers, I mean, Shefali made 163 in the tournament, followed by, I think it was Jemmy next at 85 runs across 5 innings. Deepti was next. Deepti made 116. Jemmy made 85, and then Smriti and Harman are nowhere to be seen on the list. Didn't even get close to that 80 run mark across 5 different innings. So obviously Harman will look back and say it was a poor tournament. Again, an absolutely phenomenal player and leader. But you need, we talked about this before the show. Snehal said it, and unfortunately we were wrong at that point. But you need big game players. You need a Harman to be ready in the big moments, in the big games, to step up. And it unfortunately didn't happen this time. So for me, across the tournament, no significant discredit to the bowlers. Obviously, they had a lackluster final. I think where India came up short was exactly as you said, the big name batters.
Ashwin, so let's move on from the final. Of course, we've deep dived the final. India were bowled out for 99, massive loss. But I think an overall win for the game of cricket. Women's cricket is now firmly on the map. 86,174 is not a number to be scoffed at. And there will be so many fans that come out of this today, both in India and around the world, Australia particularly, that will want to play cricket, having watched these girls play on TV. It's just a fantastic advertisement for the game. But let's talk about the future of the Indian cricket team a little bit, the women's cricket team in particular, of course. Firstly, Ashwin, given we are competing with Australia and England, right? And they are probably the two most professional setups that they have in the women's game. Australia, of course, have a big bash. England, of course, have a T20 tournament for their ladies as well. Is there a need to increase, the number of resources that are allocated to women's cricket, giving them more resources? I mean, the BCCI seem to have unlimited resources. Pouring that into the men's game seems like what they've done up until now. But let's talk about the resource question first. Should we be giving a lot more resources to women's cricket? And I think the answer is yes. But the question is, where should those be concentrated?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I completely agree. The answer is yes. There need to be more resources flowing into the game. The discussions and debates over the years have been, it's not yet commercially viable enough. It isn't drawing in enough revenue. I think two things really quick on that. One, 86,000 plus people. We're at that point. We're at a tipping point where it's commercially viable enough. India, hasn't brought home a big trophy, but reached the finals of a fantastic ODI World Cup in 2017, reached the finals of a fantastic T20 World Cup, obviously in 2020 that we just talked. The time is now, and it's like any business, you have to invest and you get behind it as it's on the upswing to take it to that peak, because waiting for it to organically hit that peak it just doesn't happen, right? And so to your second part of your question is, where do you invest and how do you do it? I think England and Australia have identified, unlike how the men's game grew in the last, call it, century, at this point in time, and it's similar to what the men's associate nations are seeing as well, is the path to financial viability and the path to growing your user base is 2020 cricket, right? There's no doubt about that. Although I wish India played more, or the Indian women played more test matches, and they have a strong ODI side and a decent ODI setup. I think as BCCI looks at pouring funding in it has to be in the T20 format. And so whether that looks like a women's IPL sooner than I think they may be ready for, whether it looks like a different format of tournament with fewer teams, but really focused and really driving interest and broadcast rights, etc. in the game, I'm not the expert to make that call, but I think it needs to be in the 2020 format.
Absolutely agree. And of course, the women's IPL is something that's on everybody's radar. We have the Women's T20 Challenge. And given that we won't be having double headers on the weekends this time, is that an opportunity to fit in some games for the women, Ashwin, as what used to happen as the first game of the day instead?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting idea. I mean, just to be clear, I think there will still be some double headers in the IPL this year, just a lot fewer than normally. It's every Saturday and every Sunday is a doubleheader. I think it's only one of the days, and it's not every single week. But yeah, great opportunity. You have airtime where viewers are used to seeing a game. Use it and try to promote the women's game further.
So let's hope the BCCI is listening to Edges and Sledges to give them yet another idea. But Ashwin, two more things I wanted to pick up on before we move to the positives for India. Firstly, Ashwin, fitness standards. Did you feel that our ladies were fit enough? Of course, the Indian men's team has gone with the yo-yo test, and we've tried to improve the fitness of the team, because Kohli is very much a believer of if you can make those extra yards to take that catch, that can change a game. And secondly, the fielding standards, which are slightly related to fitness, I suppose, because right at the start, even after India beat Australia, we tweeted out saying how long before Harman kind of molds this team in her own image, bringing in better fielding standards and bringing in more fitness standards, etc. Because Shefali, to tell the truth, she's 16 years old, she's got a long way to go in her career, but she spent most of the time just sprawled on the floor. Every time she feels the ball, she just kind of collapses. And we saw other players as well. I think there was Deepti, not very quick across the ground and stuff like that. So fielding standards and fitness standards, Ashwin, where do we go from here for the women's team?
Yeah, I think, there's an interesting sort of a quote or approach that I heard recently, and I'm going to butcher the specific words, but the point of it is, it's very easy to look at where you are and compare to where somebody else is and feel like, you're not up to the mark. And I think if you look at India's fielding and fitness from that lens, 100% true. I think it's important to also look at where you are compared to where you were, right? And measure progress. And I think, yeah, I think you're right. It's a matter of time until we get to the point where fitter, faster players who are better fielders start to make the cut. I think India hasn't had that kind of bench strength. And so it also links back to the more domestic cricket, more of a IPL style, women's IPL style format, whatever that looks like. But yeah, when Harman has the choice to say, hey, this player has a, slightly lower, 5, 7, 10% lower batting average or bowling average, but can, add the extra runs while batting with somebody else because they push those twos into threes or can pick up those fantastic catches, then the math changes. Right, I think we just haven't had the bench strength to allow for that just yet. So I think I see it coming. I think in a world where you're fighting this incredible uphill battle, not everything's going to be perfect at once, and we as supporters and fans need to be okay with that, while still helping push the quality of the game and push the board to invest money to get that quality up.
I think that's a superb answer, Ashwin, and I think it holds true for every field of life, doesn't it? Compete with yourself and what you were rather than someone else. And of course, it's easy for us to sit here and say the men's team is doing this or the Australian women's team is doing that, but it's a question of taking things in context and seeing where the Indian women's cricket team has come from and where they've got to. And I think it's been an incredible achievement. It's been a brilliant performance for our girls to get to the final. They've played with a smile on their faces. They've played and given us all so much joy. So, Ashwin, I want to end on a positive note before we go to the break. Give me your 2 biggest positives to come out of this tournament, please, from the Indian women's cricket team perspective.
Yeah, I mean, the first one, obviously, despite not having a great final, I think India's spin bowlers, right? And specifically Poonam Yadav picked up a great 4 took 10 wickets across the course of the tournament, bowling at under 6 runs and over. Just a phenomenal player, a champion player who brought her A game to a big tournament. And you feel for a player who had such a great run and wasn't able to bring that level to the final. I mean, still bowled pretty well in the final, just 1 for 30. But so Poonam Yadav definitely a big highlight. And then we talked about her quickly already, but Shefali Verma at 16 to be India's highest run scorer in a World Cup, be the reason for a lot of wins. I mean, huge potential future. I think if you're her right now or her support staff, coach, parents, etc., you're now thinking, okay, mental conditioning, fitness, fielding, and boy, this young girl has the potential to be a huge superstar. So lots of positives, very excited. I think we're so harsh on any of our teams as Indian fans, but I mean, to make the finals of a World Cup and lose to the significant favorites who were better on the day, still an absolutely mammoth accomplishment. So really, really proud of our team.
And also 5-time world champion, right? Plus the favourites. And our team is a young team. And as you say, we will certainly hope that they will be lifting an ICC trophy soon. So on that note, guys, we're going to go to break. Come back from the break. We're going to talk a lot more about Indian ICC tournaments, and we will be talking about India's squad versus the South African team. So stay tuned, and we'll see you after this break.
Hey everybody, welcome to another awesome, amazing week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We'd like to thank our sponsors this week, HDFC Life and Paytm Money. Sponsors make this stuff possible. If you work for a brand which you think would benefit from sponsoring the show on IVM, please do reach out to us. We appreciate that. We have 3 new shows releasing this week. Uncle Please Sit. It's a podcast where Tushar and Joel speak about and strip away the misinformation of fact-free opinions that we often encounter in public. Stay tuned for the first episode releasing this Monday, the 9th of March. We're starting a new podcast called Smile India, hosted by Shifa Maitra. This podcast is both in English and Hindi, and it tells us about the uplifting and positive news from around the country. Episodes drop every Monday and Thursday starting the 9th of March. And Absolutely Right is a graphology podcast. That's right, graphology. Host Aditi Surana deploys her superpower of handwriting analysis and unravels some traits and characteristics of guests, including me and a whole bunch of people from IVM who you're familiar with. Stay tuned for the first episode releasing this Wednesday on 11th of March. On Advertising is Dead, Varun is joined by Tarika Soni, the head of monetization at Snapchat. They talk about content in the world of social media. And people, Edges and Sledges celebrated its 100th episode last week. Go back and listen to that if you haven't yet. This week, they talk about the Women's T20 World Cup India versus Australia final. And on Begin the Journey this week, Ashish shares a short story on dreams and joining the dots in our life. On Simplified, Tony Naren and Shrikar discuss the world's happiness index. On Paperback, Rachita and Satyajit are joined by the host of Litnama, Lakshmi Krishnan. They talk about women's role in writing and fiction written by women. On The Habit Coach, we have a Women's Day special where Ashwin talks about periods, PMS, PCOD, and other taboo subjects which shouldn't be taboo at all. On Geek Fruit, Dinkar and Jishnu switch things up and talk about some pop culture other than movies that they've been following, from YouTube channels to reality TV shows. On Mr. and Mrs. Binge Watch, Janice and Anirudh discuss Season 2 of Narcos Mexico. On the Empowering series, Zarina is joined by actor Jim Sarb. They talk about the art of storytelling and his unconventional characters. On Postcards from Nowhere, Utsav shares some fascinating stories of Bengali food. And with that, let's get you on with your show.
Welcome back from that break. And guys, we've been talking about the Indian World T20 performance. India, of course, lost in the final, but it was a brilliant run to get there. Ashwin, I want to talk a little bit more about India and ICC tournaments of late, right? We suffered a heartbreak Sunday yesterday on International Women's Day. We've, of course, gone through the heartbreak of CWC 19 last year. The Under-19 World Cup, we lost in the final last month. We lost the T20, Lord's final a couple of years ago. We've lost in lots of semi-finals of late. So, Ashwin, what's going on with India losing in knockouts? And I have a theory about this, but I just want to hear what your thoughts are first.
It's a tough question, right? And again, I think as fans of India or of any country, you look at the record and say, why is India disproportionately losing in knockouts? And the truth is, in any World Cup format, let's say a format that has semis that lead up to a final and a winner, 75% of the teams, which is 3 out of 4, lose in a knockout, right? If you start adding in quarters, then that number increases even more to 7 out of 8. But I'm not going to get overly bogged down in math. The beauty of knockout format is that more teams lose than win, right? So New Zealand could argue, they could look back and say they've lost a lot of knockouts in the last few years as well. And so I'm not justifying anything. I'm saying we overreact sometimes as Indian fans. That said, there does seem to be a little bit of a deeper element of not being able to bring your biggest mental game in the knockout matches. And by the time you're playing a knockout, for the most part, any team could take it on that day. And that's what I sort of said earlier, is a lot of what Healy did amazingly well in the final was just made it about mindset and got the bowlers in the wrong frame of mind within the first 5 minutes of the innings.
Yeah, so Ashwin, I just wanted to add to that. And my theory actually is that the reason why we are seeing so many issues at ICC knockout games is we're making these knockouts every time, and the expectation is now for us to win. And the person who spoilt us is, of course, my favorite cricketer and your favorite target, MS Dhoni. I mean, everything changed in 2007, right? Until then, in our lifetime, India hadn't won an ICC trophy. We then had the World Cup in 2011. We then had the Champions Trophy in 2013. And therefore, within a span of 6 years, we had won 3 trophies. ICC trophies, World Tournament, proper wins. I mean, and the expectation just changed. The expectation was like, if you don't win the tournament, it's nothing. So we now get trolled by the Pakistani fans for Champions Trophy 17. Right? We get upset when there's CWC 19 chat that goes on. I mean, I actually sent you a link saying this still hurts so much. I think it was this week, actually. I was watching those highlights. And it's the expectation from an Indian team of any kind, whether it's the under-19 team, whether it's the women's team, whether it's the men's team, whether it's the India A team. I'm sure if there's the India Legends team, if it loses, there'll be questions asked. So, I mean, I think that is what's happened, that the expectation has completely changed. The expectation is that India must win the tournament. And so therefore, every time we lose, there's a huge outcry that India has failed. What we don't look at, as you say, is where we were, right? And most of our childhood, I mean, we've been knocked out of the 92 World Cup without qualifying. So that's where I started watching cricket. We didn't even qualify for the knockouts. 99, we were knocked out without qualifying for the knockouts. 2007, we were knocked out without qualifying for the knockouts. So, I mean, we are used to that. But the new generation of people that watch cricket are not used to it. Yes, things have changed. We have more resources to put into it and stuff. But the whole talk about choking, Ashwin, is that valid at all? And I know we've titled this show "Choke the India," and we must give credit to PCCI podcast for that name which we've taken. But Dhruv Singh wrote in, other listeners wrote in saying we must talk about choking. Are India the new chokers? And I say this because you can't choke if you don't get to the knockouts, right? And lots of teams don't get to the knockouts, so the question doesn't arise.
Yeah, I think well summarized. And I think you said it absolutely right, that You can't choke if you don't get to the knockouts. It's progress to be getting to the knockouts. The nature of being a competitive, ambitious team and having won the World Cup when we did under Dhoni is, yeah, we want to keep doing that and we want to keep doing better. So as long as, like I said, as long as our approach and our conversation is healthy, both as fans and as the selectors and the management in the game, that this is what we want. We want to be pushing our side to do better. It doesn't mean it's going to happen overnight, nor does it happen anywhere, and nor should it. But, progress is important. And I think there are steps we need to keep taking to minimize the quote unquote choking, but I don't think it's choking just yet. I think it's too soon to try to use that tag, as much as I appreciate the catchy clickbaity headline.
Awesome. And Ashwin, just related to that, and you mentioned it a little bit earlier, do we need a sports psychologist for the Indian teams across the board? Is there somebody that needs to help us, as you say, from the mental side of things, a mental conditioning coach, or someone who can tell the players how to deal with nerves for big games and basically try and calm them down a little bit before the game starts, really, because maybe that could help?
Yeah, I think it could. I think most professional sports teams in the world, whether big clubs or big leagues or international at this point, have some sort of mental conditioning expert, mental conditioning coach, sports psychologist. So I don't actually know who India has in the setup right now, if anybody, but I 100% think that's important for both the men's game and the women's game, and even the India A's and the under-19s, because if you're relying on the coach or manager or captain to do all of that, it's very, very difficult. They're not professionally trained to do that. Their job is to kind of motivate and drive excitement, engagement, and just get the team ready and raring to go. But it's a lot more than that. And, the brain needs to be trained the way the arms and legs need to be trained. And so if you have physical fitness coaches, you probably need mental conditioning experts as well.
Yeah, I think maybe the BCCI could look into getting us a sports psychologist or a mental conditioning coach. Nikhil Krishnan, thank you for writing that in. He says a sports psychologist might have helped in mitigating or at the very least lessening those nerves for our ladies. And he's talking about it in a wider context as well. But Ashwin, there's another aspect to all of this, right? And the other aspect to all of this is planning and tactics. And India's response, and I've had a rant about this for the last 3 or 4 episodes, I think. India's response to losing games is to change their selection strategy, right? It's not using the existing players properly. Now, what happened in the Cricket World Cup 2019? We had one off game. Kulcha had one off game against England, and we dropped one of them and we started playing Jadeja. Fine, Jadeja is a good player, but do we press the panic button too easily? I mean, we've gone with Kulcha for 2 years before that, right? And they have one bad game and they're dropped, and we change our strategy completely around that. So do we lack on the planning front of things and the strategy front of things? And are we a little bit aimless once we get to those tournaments? Do we rely, I guess I'm asking, even in test matches, do we rely too much on pure natural talent instead of actually planning teams out and outmaneuvering them tactically?
Yeah, that's a big question. And I think, again, a tough one to assess, because I guess as India has delivered great results, right, in the last decade or so. So again, we can pick on the knockout matches. We can pick on certain test matches that have been tough and recency bias about the India-New Zealand test. But India is the number 1 test team, is at top of the World Test Championship. And exactly to your point, has won a T20 World Cup in the last decade, has won or slightly more than a decade, has won an ODI World Cup during that time, and has reached the knockouts of many, many finals. So it's a little harsh, I think, to say there's not enough by way of tactics or not enough of a focus on kind of planning and strategizing. Having said that, yes, I think there is an element, and there are some situations where you've seen, we tend to keep doing the same thing on the field without seeming to have a clear plan. Or sometimes the field positionings don't exactly seem to mirror what the bowler's doing, right? I mean, there's some really basic, simple things, but if you are going to keep bowling wide outside the off stump at a full length, you need to have a deep backward point. And sometimes you start to see it not exactly line up the way it should, even from a more basic strategy standpoint. So it's tough to say why, but I think there's always room for improvement. I think it's probably a little harsh to say there's no tactics going in.
Okay, I guess that's a debate that will continue for a while because I just feel that Indian cricket can be a little bit too reliant on pure talent, and the answer to just to losing a game is just to swap the players around and get someone else in, right? And that's, I mean, having followed the team for so long, it seems to be a little bit of pattern that's developed where we swap players rather than actually use our existing players and back them and use them properly. But anyway, speaking of existing players and using players properly, the Indian squad was announced for the 3-match ODI series against South Africa recently, Ashwin. And you will be extremely pleased to know that Shardul Thakur has been kicked out of the squad. And Varun, who's not on the show this week, would be even more pleased to know that Kedar Jadhav, India finally moved on from Kedar Jadhav. So, Ashwin, let's talk a little bit about the Indian squad for the South Africa series, the 3-day ODI series starting on the 12th of March. The first game is in the beautiful ground at Dharamshala. So, Ashwin, first of all, big news for us, Pandya's back. And do you want to give our listeners a little bit of an update from his heroics at the DY Patil game?
Yeah, I mean, so the DY Patil T20 tournament I think it's an invitational tournament. It's a little bit of it's not at the level that you're usually looking for international players. Let's put it that way. But Hardik Pandya had a pretty phenomenal run. In the one match, he made 158 not out in just 55 balls, but he also made another century, and made 46 and 38 in the other two matches. So obviously he's a top talent. We've been saying for months on the show that Pandya walks back into the side. He's been a big reason for India's success over the last few years because his ability to bat lower order, hit the big sixes, and bowl, up to 10 full overs in the ODI setup. It just makes him a fairly certain shoo-in as long as he's in decent form. So fantastic performance for him in the DY Patil T20. It's what you want. It doesn't make life easy for the Shivam Dubes of the world who unfortunately missed out. But it does help with India's balance, especially when you're playing away from home. They're playing ODIs at home right now, but as you think of ongoing, Pandya walks into the side, and happy to see him delivering results.
Let's talk Shardi and Kedu very quickly. What are your thoughts on those two guys being dropped?
Yeah, I think I've said before, but Shardul, as much as I think he's a good cricketer, I have respect for him. I don't think he belongs in the setup, and so I'm happy to see the selectors and Kohli see that right now. And, in place of Shardul, who walked back into the side, is Bhuvneshwar Kumar, who I think is interesting. I think they gave Saini his spot, or allowed Saini to maintain his spot. And then they had Bhuvi come back as a quick. So I'm excited for that. Obviously, we talked about it a few episodes, I think, where we said, what sort of happened to him? And I think you were responding saying, wow, I didn't even think about him in my consideration set. He just disappeared from it. So happy to see he's back in the mix. I hope he gets a few games again in a series that's just a one-off, that's not super relevant right now. And then, yeah, I feel a little for Kedar Jadhav. I mean, he probably deserves to be treated better than he has, because we talked about he's a quality number 6, but he turns 35 this month. And so I understand from a future-looking perspective, I think hopefully we can look back and say he had a good run, but he's not in the plans for the next World Cup, so it doesn't make sense to keep playing him.
A nice little birthday gift for Kedar there. But as you said, Bhuvi is a very interesting pick, and I'm glad he's back because I think he makes Bumrah the bowler that he is. It's Bhuvi and Bumrah, right? The two guys that India depended on in the last World Cup. So I'm glad to see him back. And I think as a bowling partnership, they complement each other really well. So looking forward to seeing those two guys back. You'd be pleased that Manish Pandey has retained his spot. So hopefully he will continue to perform well. But Kohli hasn't been rested, Ashwin. Do you think India have missed a little bit of a trick there? Because you've got the IPL coming up. He's going to be playing non-stop there, obviously for franchise reasons. Should we have given him a little bit of a break after his poor tour of New Zealand?
I think it's a pretty straightforward answer. And I think in an ideal world, a break would have been good. There's no doubt about that. I think I can't remember the last time both Kohli and Rohit were rested or were out while playing a top side. And so with Rohit being injured, it sort of became a no-brainer that you need somebody to step up and lead, and you need one of the two world's best ODI batsmen right now that India has in their setup. And with Rohit out, Kohli had to be there for the team. So I think if I was them, I may have leaned in and given him a rest because the series doesn't mean all that much. But I do 100% understand why they felt he had to play and why he himself felt he had to play while Rohit wasn't around.
And of course, the person who would have replaced him as captain in the absence of Rohit and Virat, if he'd been rested, would have been KL Rahul, the man who can do pretty much anything, Ashwin. So let's go back to our conversation a few episodes ago. And is Rahul going to be our ODI keeper as well? Because Rishabh Pant, and being the Rishabh Pant show, we have lasted all of 45 minutes without speaking about him. But Rishabh Pant is in the squad. Does he make the 11? Or does Rahul get the big gloves? Your thoughts, please.
Yeah, this is going to be a really interesting call. I think we could debate it all the way, but since you asked me for a prediction, I'm predicting in the first ODI, Rahul gets the gloves, and they try to see how they can use that to influence balance. I think it's going to be a little tougher for Rahul. I mean, he's kept in India many times before, but if Kuldeep and Chahal both get picked, that's a tough keeping gig for anybody, let alone for a batsman who keeps part-time. But my prediction is that Pant is on the bench and Rahul starts. I'm probably going to be wrong, but we'll see by next week's episode.
And I would agree with you because Shikhar Dhawan is back to open the batting, but we also have Shaw and Gill both in the squad. So Rahul will bat in the middle order, and I think that means he keeps the gloves. But Ashwin, between Shaw and Gill, who would you get to open the batting with Shikhar Dhawan?
I think Shaw will open the batting. I would love to see Gill get that opportunity. So I hope I'm wrong that Shaw does it because he's got experience, etc. I would love to see Gill get a shot.
And a quick prediction, 3-match series, 3-0, 2-1, 1-2. Who's winning this?
I'm going to go 2-1 to India because South Africa has just come off of beating Australia 2-1. Quinton de Kock seems to be stepping into his element as a leader. I would hope it's 3-0 in India, and we kind of take those results for granted. But I'm going to say India victory and 2-1.
Very good. And they've got some pretty great names in their side. I mean, obviously you've got de Kock, but they've got a guy called Janneman Malan, which is spelled as Janneman Malan. And so I've been enjoying his name. And there's another guy called John Smuts. So some pretty awesome names.
These names too
Smuts and de Kock batting with Janneman. I mean, you're just like, wow.
It's Janneman, you said, right?
Yeah, it's Janneman, but it's spelled with a J. So it's Janneman, literally. So
how many times will Sanjay Manjrekar say it wrong on the air?
We can do a prediction contest on that as well. But I'm sure...
But that just means somebody needs to count. So that's going to be tough.
Yeah, that will be tough. But I mean, it should be a good series. It's a 3-match series and it starts on the 12th of March. But Ashwin, also let's talk very, very quickly about two more things. And I know it's getting to 5 a.m. where you are, so I'm going to try and wrap this up as soon as I can. But the India versus West Indies Legends match, Ashwin, as we said, it felt like it was 2003 with the women's game. And of course, it felt like 2003 with Viru starting the Legends game with a 4 while batting with Sachin. Ashwin, what did you think of that? I mean, every time we think that we've seen Sachin bat for the last time, he's back again.
Yeah, I was a little surprised by that. I mean, I guess I haven't been following the news in the lead up to the Road Safety World Series. I don't have all the background on what that is either, if it's anything more than a series to draw attention to road safety. But I was outstanding, man. It was early morning, or not that early, but around 9 a.m. in my time zone. Wake up, switch on the TV, see Viru and Sachin walk out to open the batting wearing blue. Viru get off to a flyer. Sachin kind of play with a little bit more stability. It was unreal. It was just fantastic to watch it. So I hope, there's obviously a couple more matches in this series. It was just outstanding. I was so excited to watch it. And I was telling the two friends I was watching it with, this Viru looks like he could be batting for India right now. He just looked so fluid. He didn't seem to want to take a ton of singles, but you don't judge that for him being post-retired life. You judge that for him being Viru, who we've known for his entire playing career too. He didn't like the singles. He liked to see the ball go to the boundary. So much fun. What a great initiative, and nice to be able to see our legends kind of come back. I do have some questions about who made the squad and whether or not we call them legends. I thought it was pretty funny to see Manpreet Goni bowled his 3 overs, took no wickets, and then came out to bat at 2 down for some reason and got bowled first ball. So I'm sitting there thinking, I think this guy played 2 ODIs for India. So no disrespect to anybody. Obviously a good cricketer in his domestic career, but I would struggle a little to call Manpreet Goni an India legend.
Yeah, pretty awesome game as well. I mean, and as you said, Viru looked exactly like he did. He's got the same amount of batting muscle even now. So he was the match winner. He got 74 of 59, I think. So great innings, and it was great to watch Sachin and Sehwag open the batting. It was just a real throwback to simpler times of our childhood and teenage years. So really good to see that. Ashwin, I just want to wrap very quickly. Bengal versus Saurashtra is the Ranji Trophy final. We're going to be covering it extensively next week. But Ashwin, any thoughts on the final? Of course, Jaydev Unadkat, who we talked about a lot on the show, is doing really well at the moment, and Pujara will be playing the final as well, and the Bengal team is looking pretty strong as well. So who are you backing to take the Ranji Trophy final game?
Yeah, it's a tough call. I think Bengal's had a great season, but they haven't won a Ranji Trophy in 30 years and only got to a final once, or the last time they got to the final was almost 15 years ago now. I think it was 14 years. So I think I'm backing Saurashtra again. I mean, Pujara is an outstanding leader presence, and I think this will be their fourth attempt at a victory. So I think I'm backing Saurashtra a little. I think it's going to be a good match, whichever way it goes. At the time of recording this, it started, and Saurashtra's gotten off to a flyer. I mean, they're by Test match standards, but they're at 133 for 2. So obviously starting really big already. I think I'm backing Pujara to take them over the line.
There you have it. Lots of predictions on this week's show. And there you have it, guys. That is a wrap on this week's show. It is episode 101 done. As usual, write into us on Twitter at OneTipOneHand, Facebook at OneTipOneHand, Instagram at OneTipOneHand, contact at onetiponehand.com. Leave us a rating, leave us a review. Tell us what you think about the show. It's great getting your feedback. Guys, we are still in the process of putting together the format for the IPL listener shows. So we will be in touch with every one of you who've written in. We are a little bit light, actually, on RCB fans. We've only got one voice note. So if you're an RCB fan and you're listening to this, do write in. It'll be more fun of a conversation with more than one of you on there. So guys, we will see you next week. We'll be covering the domestic cricket final, the Ranji Trophy final, and we will be covering the India versus South Africa series. Until then, thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.
Filter coffee is a fascinating beverage. You need to pick the right beans, blend them in the right proportion, roast them to perfection, and slow brew at the right temperature to get the perfect cup. Which is exactly like great conversations as well. You need to track down the most interesting minds, get them into their zone, and settle down for an unhurried, unscripted chat. And coffee for me is always best enjoyed with friends. I'm Karthik Nagarajan, and do share my table as I meet some of the most interesting people I know and sit them down for a strong cup of coffee and an even stronger conversation. Join me every Wednesday for a freshly brewed episode. This is not frappe. This is the Filter Coffee Podcast.
Look! Up in the internet! It's a meme! No! It's a cat video! No! It's the Geek Fruit Podcast!
That's right, we interrupt this riveting broadcast to tell you about our show, the Geek Fruit Podcast, where Tejas, Dinkar and I, Jishnu, talk about everything in pop culture, including DC, Marvel, Star Wars, Netflix, and everything in between.
You know how your friends hate it when you ramble about some nerdy crap and you just want somebody to listen to you? Well, sorry, there's nothing we can do about that, but come listen to us ramble and it'll almost be like the real thing. Kind of.
Listen to new episodes of the Geek Fruit Podcast every Monday and the Geek Fruit Bulletin every Thursday on iTunes, Google Podcasts, the IVM app, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Happy listening, you nerds.